Okay, we are going to continue our study of reference angles. Remember last time we were talking about how we actually find what the reference angles are. Today we're going to talk about how we actually use reference angles in order to determine a trigonometric value and how that will help us pretty easily reference, as the name suggests, what that value is. Okay, so the trig functions for t are the same as the values of the trig functions for t prime, the reference angle, except for a plus or a minus sign. So this first thing we're going to put down, now this looks maybe a little bit complicated at first when you're looking at this, but really all you need to know is, I think the easiest way to remember in each quadrant, what's positive and what's negative instead of trying to memorize each of them. Try to remember what is going to be positive in each quadrant. So if we start in the first quadrant, you can see sine, cosine, and tangent are all positive. In quadrant 2, only sine is positive. In quadrant 3, only tangent is positive. And in quadrant 4, only cosine is positive. Okay, so one way to remember this is as you start from quadrant 1, it's A, S, T, C. A lot of the times we like to use all students take calculus to help us remember which quadrant has which trig values that are positive. Okay, so in the first quadrant, all are positive. Second quadrant, only sine is positive. In the third quadrant, only tangent. And in the fourth quadrant, only cosine. Okay, so how does that help us determine what the actual values are? Well, let's look at this example. Use reference angles to find the exact value of sine, cosine, and tangent of t, where t is equal to 3 pi over 4. So let's start by drawing this out. So this is where drawing it out is going to help us, but we do need to know in particular which quadrant it's in, first to determine what the reference angle is going to be, but also to determine whether the trig values are going to be positive or negative in that quadrant. So 3 pi over 4, let's try to remember this as, okay, this is 3/4 of pi, and pi is half of a rotation. So 3/4 of the way there. Okay, so it looks like we're in quadrant 2. That's 3 pi over 4. Now, what is the reference angle? The reference angle is, well, how much more do you have to add to 3 pi over 4 to add up to pi? So this little section here, that is pi over 4. Remember that little trick that I mentioned last time? That the reference angle will always have the same denominator as the original angle that you're given. Okay, so how do you determine what sine of 3 pi over 4 is? Well, you use the reference angle, and you use which quadrant it's in to determine what's positive and what's negative. So we're in quadrant 2, and in quadrant 2, if you're going around, all students, so S, that means only sine is going to be positive in quadrant 2. Okay, so that means sine of 3 pi over 4 is going to be the same as sine of pi over 4, which is a memorized value. Remember in that chart that we had memorized a long time ago, that would be equal to root 2 over 2. Cosine of 3 pi over 4 is going to be the same as cosine of pi over 4, but it's going to be negative, right? We're in quadrant 2. The only thing that's positive is sine. So it's negative cosine of pi over 4. You know that cosine of pi over 4 is equal to root 2 over 2, so this is equal to negative root 2 over 2. All right, and then again, tangent is going to be negative in quadrant 2, so this is the same as negative tangent of pi over 4, which is going to equal negative 1. Okay, so you're always going to be looking at what quadrant am I in, determine if the values are going to be positive or negative in that quadrant, and using that, use the memorized values. For now, you're only going to be getting values that you have memorized. So only those special right triangle values. So use those, use which quadrant it's in to determine whether it's positive or negative. Okay, let's try another one. All right, so in this next example, we have the angle being 4 pi over 3. So think of it as 4/3 of pi, which is 1 1/3, so it's a little bit past pi, right? It's 1 pi and then 1/3 of pi, so that takes us into quadrant 3. Okay, so that here is 4 pi over 3. Now, determine what the reference angle is. Again, remember the trick. The denominator is always going to be the same as the original angle given to you. So that would be over 3. We know that we have to, if we subtract off pi from 4 pi over 3, we're left with pi over 3. So the reference angle here is pi over 3. Okay, so now let's determine sine, cosine, and tangent of 4 pi over 3. So we are in 1, 2, 3, quadrant 3. So that means that these values are going to be the same as sine, cosine, and tangent of pi over 3, with the exception of where it's positive and negative. So in quadrant 3, all students take, so only tangent is going to be positive. So that means that sine is the same as negative sine of pi over 3. Cosine 4 pi over 3 is the same as negative cosine pi over 3. And tangent is the only one that's positive, so this is going to be the same as tangent of pi over 3. And then now it's just a matter of using those memorized values. So sine of pi over 3 is root 3 over 2, so this is negative root 3 over 2. Cosine pi over 3 is equal to 1/2, so this is equal to negative 1/2. And then tangent of pi over 3 is equal to root 3. All right, let's do one more. So this time we have 11 pi over 6. Now, 11 pi over 6, if you're trying to determine where it is on here, think of it this way. 11 pi over 6, if you add one more to get 12 pi over 6, that's 2 pi, right? So 11 pi over 6 is just under 2 pi. That must mean that 11 pi over 6 is going to be in quadrant 4. So here's 11 pi over 6. And now we need to determine what that reference angle is. That reference angle being, what do you have to add to 11 pi over 6 to get it to equal 2 pi? Well, that's pi over 6. And again, that denominator is the same as the denominator you were originally given. Okay, so now let's take that, and we are going to find sine, cosine, and tangent of 11 pi over 6. We are in quadrant 4. So in quadrant 4, all students take calculus C. That means cosine is the only one that is positive in quadrant 4. So that means that sine of 11 pi over 6 is the same as negative sine of pi over 6. Cosine is the one that stays the same. So this is equal to positive cosine pi over 6. And tangent is going to be negative, so this is equal to negative tangent of pi over 6. Okay, so now we just need to use those memorized values. So sine of pi over 6 is equal to 1/2, so this is equal to negative 1/2. Cosine pi over 6 is equal to root 3 over 2. And tangent of pi over 6 is root 3 over 3, so this is negative root 3 over 3. Okay, the last thing we're going to go over today is if you have coterminal angles. So coterminal angles, if you remember, are angles that look exactly the same, but the way in which you got there is different. So for example, the initial and terminal side of 11 pi over 6 is the same as negative pi over 6. Those are just two different ways of writing the same angle. So if it's just a different way of writing the same angle, then the trig ratios are going to be exactly the same. That's different from reference angles. Reference angles, we're using a different angle measure. In this case, we're using pi over 6 instead of 11 pi over 6. Pi over 6 is not the same as 11 pi over 6, right? It's not coterminal. They're not different ways of writing the same angle measure. Okay, so trig ratios of coterminal angles are going to be the same. Okay, so for example, find the sine, cosine, and tangent of 7 pi over 3. So 7 pi over 3, if we were to draw this out, would be a full rotation, right? 6 pi over 3 is 2 pi, plus another pi over 3. So this is 7 pi over 3 here. Now another way to write this is pi over 3. Okay, so since 7 pi over 3 is coterminal with pi over 3, that means in order to find sine, cosine, and tangent of 7 pi over 3, all we need to do is find sine, cosine, and tangent of pi over 3. We don't have to worry at all about positive and negative values. First, because we're in quadrant 1. Second, because we know what the values of sine, cosine, and tangent of pi over 3 are. And we were told that coterminal angles will have the same trig values. Okay, so sine of 7 pi over 3 is the same as sine of pi over 3. Cosine 7 pi over 3 is the same as cosine of pi over 3. And tangent of 7 pi over 3 is the same as tangent of pi over 3. And these are all values that you have memorized really well now. So this is equal to root 3 over 2. This is equal to 1/2. And this is equal to root 3. Okay, so that is how we use reference angles and how we find sine, cosine, and tangent, your trig values of any angle measure. So the key things to remember from today are you have to know which quadrant you're in. You have to sketch the angle measure in order to determine which quadrant you're in. Once you know which quadrant you're in, find the reference angle, determine what's positive, what's negative, and that's it.